live. We're live. We have one here. Yes, I can start. Not yet.
Okay.
Good afternoon, everybody. Now this is the start. We are on air. I would like to welcome you all to this session organized by the Euro-Mediterranean Economists Association on investing in and financing acceleration of sustainable development in a net zero scenario, the role of low and middle income countries. This event is very important because we are going to discuss really what is the role of those countries, knowing that there is also a need to move into this net zero scenario, and all the countries globally are committed and have to be committed into this transformation. This morning we had the commitments from the European Union, not only on the Green Deal of the EU, but also the financing, the financial sector. And they are all committed, not only from the European Central Bank, from the European Regulatory Authority, financial sector, and the consumer organizations, really to move the transition into action and accelerating this transition. I have the honor and pleasure to welcome Hela Said. She is the Minister of Planning and Economic Development of the Republic of Egypt. It's great to have you here with us today. Hela has been a friend of us since many years. She has been one of the co-founder of the Euro-Mediterranean, now becoming Euro-Mediterranean African Network for Economic Studies. She's a professor of economics at the University of Cairo in the time. She's a friend of us for many years. Great to have you here. Pleasure. Thank you for hosting this COP. It's really a great opportunity to see that a country in the Mediterranean, in Africa, is really taking the leadership also on the COP27. I would also like to welcome His Excellency Prime Minister of Bahamas. Thank you for being with us today. It's a great pleasure to know what Bahamas also is doing in terms of accelerating the transition, going to actions with very clear opportunities and very clear schemes. I would like first to give the floor to Hela because she wanted to give an introduction, welcome speech also on behalf of the government, on behalf of the ministry. Please, Hela.
This working. Thank you, Rim. Thank you. Your Excellency, Prime Minister, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like first to welcome you all participants, to Sharm el-Sheikh, the green city of peace. And I'd like to thank my dear friend, Professor Rim Ayadi, for inviting me to join this esteemed panel, and of course, within this very nice participants at the margins of the COP27. Rim has mentioned, has been a long-time friend. She's a very solid economist that have always pioneering different initiatives, and I'm proud to be joining the Euro-Mediterranean initiative since its inception. So we have a long track of history working with Rim and the Mediterranean think tank on different projects and different research that would help boost economic development in the Mediterranean region. This COP provides one distinctive opportunity for all stakeholders to step up to the challenges at hand and move quickly from ideas and pledges phase to the solution and implementation phase. At the outset, I'd like to reiterate that climate change can be regarded as the most catastrophic challenge of our lifetime. As warming continues and planetary boundaries are increasingly put under considerable pressure, lives and livelihoods will be undermined. The world will continue to suffer impacts that will exceed its adaptive capacity, from erratic weather conditions, triggering droughts to some areas and floods in other areas, to the increasing temperature, prompting a rise in sea levels. Such phenomena will provoke major political, economic, and social stress to the people in the world. Effectively, combating climate change requires addressing all constraints impeding climate action, the most notable of which is the issue of finance. In order to overcome this challenge and decarbonize the economies, we need investments worth around 4 to 6 trillion US dollars by 2030. About 2 trillion will be needed to help developing countries cut their greenhouse gas emissions and cope with the effects of climate change. Africa, according to different estimates, needs around 250 billion US dollars each year between 2020 and 2030 to implement its nationally determined contributions. With regards to adaptation efforts, developing countries need up to almost 340 billion every year for adaptation only. Adaptation finance for developing countries only reached up to date 29 billion US dollars, increasing around 4% from the preceding year. This is a fraction of the fraction of what we need actually in order to implement adaptation measures, such as flood defenses and early warning system for countries that have contributed the least to the emissions and to the climate problem, but are suffering the most from the outcome of the climate problem. This is not to mention the reconciliation of the irreversible losses and damage suffered by vulnerable states. Asking developing countries to find climate action heightens pressure on developing countries and their ability to fulfill development objectives, especially in the midst of the recurring geopolitical challenges and the multiple global crises already limiting the fiscal space at the developing countries. It is not only the amount of funding, but more importantly, financing mechanisms which represent a key element in defining policies and raising the level of ambition, taking into account the level of external and internal debts in all developing countries. Green bonds, sukuk, concessional loans are all plausible investments, yet they still add to debt levels and limit the ability of decision makers to raise ambition and accelerate implementation. Hence, innovative financing mechanisms and investments are desperately needed to translate this ambition into tangible outcomes on the ground, ultimately investing substantially in energy use and production that emits less carbon and in technologies that extract carbon out of the air. The best way forward is to acknowledge the central role of cooperation and collaboration with the private sector. Private sector has a main role to play in that respect, narrowing the financing gap and contributing to research development as well to innovative mechanisms. Recognizing that private investment may face various challenges and may shy out of such type of investment, private-public partnership could play a considerable role and an effective and innovative tool in financing climate-related projects. Through the integration of resources, private-public partnership can help achieve major breakthroughs as they offer a number of benefits, including cost and risk mitigation and efficient project delivery. PPPs can create new markets and harness the scale of public sector and risk mitigating capacity and the private sector's financial resources and technical competencies. In Egypt, we have major success stories in green sectors and activities that are materializing, specifically through our Sovereign Wealth Fund of Egypt, which I proudly chair. The Sovereign Fund of Egypt has been established to act as a catalyst in the early stages, availing new asset classes to the private sector, while ensuring that such offering is properly structured to ensure attractiveness and also ensure bankability of the offsetting. In the later stages of projects development, Sovereign Wealth Fund wears its other hat as an investor and solidifies its mission as a partner of choice to the private sector, with long-term minority commitments alongside our global partners. The Sovereign Wealth Fund of Egypt is contributing to efforts geared towards expanding Egypt's renewable energy production capacity, enabling it to become a pioneer in areas like green bunkering, water desalination, as well as the export of green ammonia and e-methanol. I would like to reiterate that addressing the impact of climate change should be done following an integrated approach, an approach that ensures the harmony between the global environmental agenda, whether in biodiversity, climate change, combating desertification, and the wider context of achieving sustainable development and poverty eradication, without denying the right to develop for underdeveloped countries. African countries, along with all developing countries, face high poverty rates and structural economic deficiencies. They have the right to expand energy consumption and thus economic activity. Africa is home to the highest number of multidimensional poverty. This in turn limits people's ability to access information, education, health, legal services, and more, with implications for multiple areas of development. Hence, climate action for developing countries should be discussed in consideration to the needs of all developing and emerging economies and the chronic burdens they have been dealing with. I wish you a very fruitful discussion and a very enjoyable stay in Sharm el-Sheikh. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Hela. This is really important also to have your contribution as Egypt in all the transition. And your ministry has been extremely active in sustainable development. Continue working together on the actions from transitions. All the countries really have to move forward into this dynamic. Thank you very much. I would like to give the floor to His Excellency Philip Davis, Prime Minister of Bahamas. Why Bahamas in the Mediterranean? Is a country that is by the sea. They have developed an innovative financing mechanism for carbon credit, and I think this could be a new financing mechanism also used in the Mediterranean and Africa for really having new asset class, helping all the countries really to move toward a complete new transformative scenario for our region. Please, Prime Minister, the floor is yours.
Thank you all very much. Let me start off by indicating that the world's response to climate change and its consequences has been to see it through the lens of what they call mitigation and adaptation. Mitigation, inspiring us to lessen our carbon footprints, and adaptation, building and rebuilding to protect our infrastructure and our lives from the consequences. Now, when you think about those lenses through which we look through the consequences, it requires money and finances. And small island developing states like ourselves, whenever we would have had an event, a catastrophic event for like Dorian, we would have lost $3.4 billion that was required from our resources to reconstruct and rebuild. Again, when we look at that in the context of, well, how do we mitigate? Mitigation in reducing our footprints requires us to move away from fossil fuel. Again, that is an expensive exercise. Again, it requires money. And so with the consequences of having to rebuild, reconstruct, and restore, and at the same time having to look to alternative energy for the purposes of mitigating and lowering our footprints, again, the common denominator, money. And it becomes very expensive for us. And as the minister pointed out, for developing states like ourselves, to get those funds, we have to borrow. So our debt becomes exponentially greater and a burden. And when you look at the profile of that burden, significantly, most of it is directly associated with reconstruction, recovery from the consequence of hurricanes. And so the issue of loss and damage becomes a very important topic. And the response to that has to be very robust and innovative. And so for the last 30 years, the COP has been discussing around the periphery, on the edges, loss and damage. For the first time, it made its way on the agenda for this meeting. But yet, it excludes the very most important element of loss and damage, and that is liability, compensation for loss and damage. We're not going to be discussing that. That has been kicked down the road to 2024 because the industrialized world don't want to compensate countries like ours for the consequences of their industrialized life. And I put it that way because the time for polluters to pay is now and not 2024 from today. And that is the message I've been carrying through these margins whilst I'm here. Because small island developing states like ours, we either going to become climate refugees or we'll meet our watery grave. As you know, the Commonwealth of Bahamas is an ocean state spread over 100,000 square miles. Most of our land mass, 80% of our land mass, is less than 3 meters above sea level. With the rapid rising of sea levels, we will meet our watery grave if something doesn't happen now. And as I mentioned yesterday, the 1.5 that we're supposed to keep alive, well, it's on life support now. And unless action takes place now, that's the consequence of where we are. And so, whilst we've been waiting for the world to act, while we wait for the industrialized world, who became wealthy as such because of their lack of concern for the environment, their overuse of fossil fuel that has put all the greenhouse gases in the air. While we wait for that, what we have come to realize is that our country is one of the major carbon sink of the world. I'm now calling us the garbage collectors because we're taking the garbage out of the air that's being put up by the industrialized world. Time for us to be paid for that. And we're not going to be paid through the loss and damage because, again, the industrialized world, they're running away from that. And why? Because they believe it'll just end up where we ask them to give to the world a blank check. We're not asking for a blank check. We just want an acknowledgement that you're going to pay, and what we fill that check in, the amount we put in that check, is at least up for negotiation. But we don't even get to negotiate that amount at this time, not until they say 2024. So we need to act on our own. We can't wait. And so for the last year, we have been looking at our blue carbon, which has been acknowledged now as one of the major carbon sink of the world. We want to convert that and monetize that into a new asset class. So blue carbon is now on. We have passed legislation to identify, map out, and have verified our carbon assets, our blue carbon assets. Predominantly, it is the seagrass, and the scientific evidence suggests that 40%, at least 40% of the world's seagrass reside in the Bahamas. And if the scientists are correct that the seagrass absorb 5 times more of the carbon out of the air as trees, then we'll know that that is a valuable asset for us. I'm happy to say that the IMF, in my conversations with them, have now come to work with us to ensure that it does in fact become a new asset class that could be put on our books. And within the next couple months, we hope to be able to raise funds as a result of what we have discovered to help us transition to that alternative energy that is necessary to help in our mitigation efforts. And so that is where we are, and we have invited other small island developing states to join us, come and see what we are doing so we could share our innovative work in this regard to raise our own finance from our own assets until we're able to hold accountable those who have done to us what we think they ought to compensate us for. And so I'm happy to be a part of this, this exercise. We're prepared to share where we are with the world, and that's what I've said as well. We've already had a number of inquiries, and we'll have a lot of visits in short while to see what we're doing and how we are doing it. We are not sitting back and waiting for the world, because I think if we do, we will become, as I said, climate refugees, and we will meet our watery grave. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Prime Minister, for this very innovative financing mechanism, and I believe that this is also part of the valuation of nature capital. This could be, if it is really taken forward, also sun could be valued, everything can be valued in a different way, so really this gives the possibility to many countries in low and middle income countries to have further assets that they can be used into development, but clean development, sustainable development. But this needs a lot of research, a lot of science behind to allow this change, this transformative change, in fact, that we need for going forward. But another thing also you mentioned, and I think this is important, is that the international financial organizations recognize this as an asset class or also promote it further. And this is the role of promotional banks. It's very essential to take certain guarantees or co-guarantees to allow this new financing mechanism to move. And this is why what we heard this morning, also the role of regulation, the role of policy, the role of supervision, to ensure that these type of mechanisms, they are well anchored into a sound and resilient financial system, that then you will have investors who can come and invest in it with the potential for returns, and also they can manage their risk properly, not to have the next, I would call it, the crisis. But again, I think this is a great idea, and I hope in COP27 you will take it forward to the head of state, and for all of you that could become really pillar of the transformative scenario. You have Minister with you, all of you, I think you have taken these opportunities and then going forward into this new pillars for transformation, and this is what we want. And maybe the transformation will come from countries like Bahamas, from Egypt, from Africa, to really move into a clean and a sustainable type of economic model. So thank you very much again for being with us, and thank you very much. And we have to continue our panel. If you can stay with us, obviously. I know that you have to go. Thank you very much. Thank you. Okay, we're back to our panel. I think we have heard very important speeches from two countries, Republic of Egypt and Bahamas. We have also heard that those countries, they suffer from certain weaker economic fundamentals and conditions. And obviously, they have much more challenges to really finance their sustainable transition. So what we can also see that increasing indebtedness is not the way forward, so you need to have new sources of finance that will allow them really to value their nature capital. And what we heard today from the Prime Minister of Bahamas, this could be a possibility that could be moved forward if very well understood and valued, and then this will allow certain countries like Bahamas to develop a new asset class that could be interesting for the financial sector. Another thing is also moving into more renewable energy, and then instead of really going into fossil fuel, moving into countries which are, who could be, in fact, exporting renewables to other countries of the world. These are clean sources of energy. Could be also with new technologies like green hydrogen nowadays, which is really being developed. Now, on the what we also heard this morning, there is a need for more private-public partnership, more blended financing, more role for the promotional banks, like, for example, EIB, which is a bank that is clearly green in Europe, and it has been really moving into further greening itself and further greening the European economy. Now, at EMEA, we have proposed also a solution for low and middle-income countries to, in fact, finance their post-COVID recovery and also the sustainable transition towards decarbonization scenario, toward also responding to the climate crisis that we are living in. And this, and this plan, in fact, is a private-public SDG compliant financing plan, which is really trying to accelerate the transition and provide sources of financing to countries that are, in fact, indebted. Now, the idea is to have some guarantees from the international financial organizations, like, for example, the IMF. There is already a fund called Resilience and Sustainability Trust that is there to help countries develop their financing and enhance their financing, but then to access to that, it's more difficult, and this is actually enhanced via the SDR and the reallocation of SDRs from other developed countries that could really help the low and middle income countries to accelerate the transition toward actions. So our proposal here is that this trust will issue guarantees and co-guarantees up to 60%, and then allow countries to issue bond, call them the sustainability bond or sustainable transition bond, which will be having a long maturity of 50 years with a lower interest rate. And there, the private sector could be involved in it, and then the yield should not be more than what is being now on market, means it should be subsidized. So this, in fact, will help those countries to transform their unpaid debt and to finance their recovery plans with co-guarantees from this RCT, which is the Resilience and Sustainability Trust. So this was our proposal, and I wanted to share with you. On screen, I have a few panelists, and I have a panelist here on site. So I would like to start with Emanuele Pinto Moreira. Is he there? Yes?
Yes, I'm here.
Yes, Emanuele, he is the Director, Country Economic Department of the African Development Bank. The African Development Bank has been very active in trying really to find mechanisms to finance sustainability, sustainable transition in Africa. So please, Emmanuel, the floor is yours. You heard the keynote speeches. You heard our proposal, which I have shared with you already on paper. So how do you see this? What is our proposal, your proposal, in fact, to the COP27 to enhance financing for sustainable transition, particularly in Africa? The screen is yours, Emmanuel.
Thank you very much, Rim. Let me perhaps just, so I don't have too much time, let me just say that, first of all, the context in which we are, a context of multiple shocks, particularly in Africa, right? COVID-19, Russia-Ukraine war, and climate change. So in that context, there are a lot of challenges for many African countries. Understand that, for instance, fiscal space has shrunk because of African countries trying to actually use their fiscal space to kind of cope with COVID-19. On the monetary policy also, it's kind of difficult today because of rising prices, inflation. And perhaps the most important thing is the fact that today African countries are really indebted. And since 2010, Africa is actually undergoing the second wave of debt. So we understand that between 2019 and 2020, the debt to GDP ratio increased by more than 10 percentage points of GDP, from 60% of GDP to more than 70% of GDP, and in particular commercial debt to GDP. So from our perspective, we know that we say that the financing is a big issue because for transitioning, for instance, and to actually help African countries, the African Union calculated that the financing need for Africa between 2020 and 2030 would be between 1.3 and 1.6 trillion US dollars. It is when we know this kind of figure, of course, it is almost impossible to think that African countries can really finance it, right? For GDP of a country which is about 3.5 trillion, you understand that it is very, very difficult. So that's why we are actually pushing for innovative financing. What we're saying is kind of support green bonds, sustainability bonds. There is also, from the African perspective, we're also talking about in our report, the African Outlook 2022, that perhaps the debt for climate may be an issue, maybe an avenue to explore. But I have to confess that the debate within the African Bank is that, well, given the situation where the countries are today with a lot of debt, perhaps to avoid really asking this country to go back and finance the climate change by actually debt. That's why we push a lot for, and you mentioned it, the reallocation of the SDR, right, the 650 billion US dollar. Africa got only less than 5%, 33 billion. So we are saying that, well, we are well placed. It is unfortunate that the IMF created this resilience and sustainability because we show that in the African Bank, we can leverage those SDR 4 times to actually and we also show that African Development being actually an institution which actually is a premier development institution within the continent can do that. But the focus for us today, what we are saying is better for us to push for the private sector because the resources are not there for African countries and we have to deploy it, right? And they are coping with a lot of issues, rising inflation today, rising we want this transition to happen, if we want to finance climate change. But we are also saying that in that context, it's important for African countries to kind of improve the regulatory framework, but also give the infrastructure so that this private sector, the banks can come. The other thing that we are actually pushing for is to say, well, the 100 billion US dollar which were promised to developing countries per year should come, and it should be deducted from the ODA. We understand that it's challenging because today the global economy is undergoing a difficult situation, as we know, and we know that this advanced country may have a lot of issue in terms of finding the financing because themselves they have to cope with what is happening in their country. But still, we think that this is a critical issue. So African Development Bank is really putting a lot of emphasis on this private sector and asking the countries to kind of de-risk the private sector so that the private sector green finance actually can come. Let me just stop here. Perhaps I can give more perspective if you need me.
Thank you very much, Emmanuel. This is important also to keep making your proposals at a global level, particularly this week, to explain what can be really further done from an African perspective. And I see that there is an African pavilion, so I assume that there will be very strong and decisive proposals to the COP27 that they will be taken into consideration on how to accelerate the finance dimension and have really the commitments for all countries in in the developed world to support this development. I would like to introduce Robert Patalano from the OECD. He's head of division of financial market. And the OECD has been also pioneer in developing the debt transparency initiative for low-income countries, and most possibly this will be expanded later on. So Robert, the screen is yours.
Great, thank you so much, Rim, and I want to thank you in the Mediterranean Pavilion for hosting this. It's a pleasure to be here virtually, coming from Paris. So I'll speak briefly about three topics today. First, the critical importance of debt transparency. I believe Sonia Gibbs from the IIF had touched on that, and I will expand on her remarks since we are partnering as organizations to bring this forward. Second, the need to better incorporate ESG and climate factors into public debt management practice. And third, how the OECD is attempting to strengthen these good practices in developing countries. So first, as has been said by other panelists today, the decade of debt accumulation is now coming to the fore with with COVID-19, with the pandemic, and with rising yields and challenges in markets with volatility. Clearly, this is a challenge for developing countries. It's estimated that 55% of low-income countries are now facing a high risk of debt distress. So with this effort of refinancing, in part to invest in climate resilient infrastructure and other activities, this is a concern. So recognizing this, the OECD, the G20, other international fora have engaged to pave the way for greater debt sustainability and transparency. And there are a number of activities going on in the international fora, including ours, which is the OECD's Debt Transparency Initiative. And at the G20's request, the OECD had been contributing to operationalize the Institute for International Finance's voluntary principles for debt transparency. And we're doing this by developing institutional mechanisms and creating a debt data repository, which is now up and running. And we're providing data from private sector participants and commercial data providers, and also by convening public and private sector participants to come together and try and make progress on some contentious issues. And based on this data collection, we have provided an analysis to the G20 with high-level assessment and recommendations with respect to developing countries' marketable debt dynamics, and also recommendations to overcome data gaps and strengthen transparency. And one of the recommendations we have really is to improve efforts to make environmental and social considerations to bring that into debt management and transparency. So in this respect, debt transparency is really essential for sound public debt management, for fiscal accountability, and for the evaluation of debt sustainability, particularly for financially strained low-income countries seeking to maintain market access, as other speakers have said, is so important to try and reinvest in climate resilient infrastructure, other types of investments. So with that said, let me now turn to climate, how this effort relates to climate risk management in developing countries. So it's clear public and private sector financing needs are not enough. Public support for climate finance mobilized by developed countries has reached 83 billion, but this is not enough to hit the 100 billion pledge. And certainly it's not enough to invest in what's very much needed across developing countries. And we think that developing governments themselves really do need to make more effort to try and attract private sector capital to channels towards sustainable development. And we think one avenue that really needs to be taken seriously is ESGs. This is talked about along with SDGs, but really taken seriously in reporting and actions. Global investors are increasingly looking to this, and as a result, the share of ESG-labeled bonds issued in EMEs has jumped from 14% to 43% of the issuance over the past few years. So there's a clear opportunity here, but at the same time, we know there's a growing concern that many developing economies currently score poorly on ESG metrics, and this could undermine investment flows if nothing is done. There are a variety of reasons: institutional capacity, low social investment, reliance on fossil fuels, for example. But frankly, a key issue that I want to stress here is opacity. Opacity has a double negative in that countries that are opaque in how they manage their debt and how they manage sustainability, all else equal, are going to have lower credit ratings and lower ESG scores. And that cost is real. It hits the cost of capital. So our point is ESG analysis is showing that if you have a very strong investor relations program, a sovereign investor relations program embedded with plans by the governments, by finance ministries to explain how they're shifting their investments on environmental and social issues that are truly sustainable, that this is really critical to getting investor flows, getting patient capital to these countries. So therefore, the need for capacity building in this area is strong, from the issue of labeled bonds with key performance indicators, how to analyze fiscal impact on environmental and social risks, and how to improve ESG-related communication strategies. And let me now turn to Africa, since several participants are talking about the particular challenges in Africa. We have an OECD Africa partnership, and we're looking to strengthen capacity building, including good practices in debt management, debt transparency, and ESG. And to this end, in 2023, early on, we're launching capacity building seminars for African finance ministries and debt management offices to strengthen leading practices on ESG integration and communications and the broader debt transparency challenges across Africa. And as a result of that, we think that these efforts are really going to help show progress in improving debt transparency and by linking it to ESG, that will help improve patient capital flows so that low-income countries and developing countries more broadly can reinvest. As they refinance, they can reinvest in climate-resilient infrastructure and other activities in these countries. And with that, I would just say the OECD is really pleased to contribute to these capacity-building programs and good practices and to support these countries in their path to sustainable and climate-resilient growth. Thanks so much, Rim, for the time.
Thank you very much, Robert. This is important also to mention that debt transparency has been one of the commitments of the G20, and it should continue to become not only including the low-income countries, but also middle-income countries and all the world in reality, because we need to have much more transparency on disclosure, particularly on ESG risk and ESG loans and bonds and all the debt instruments. And we have heard also that even at EU level, there is a big push toward ESG disclosure from the banking side. And I think this whole disclosure thing, it's important also for market discipline and to reduce the cost of financing going forward. So debt transparency is essential to have the private sector involvement. And this is one of the commitment, in fact, of also the private sector and hopefully all the governments in Africa and in other regions of the world to abide to this transparency for more accountability and for more knowing or knowledge of where the funds have been used and how they have been used, particularly if we are going to link it to specific purposes for climate action and for adaptation, mitigation, all of this. So it's also important to know the budgets allocated for example, mitigation, adaptation, and any other aspects we want to know specifically, and this is important also for allocation purposes of capital. So thank you very much, Robert. I would like to introduce my friend Nagla Bahr. Nagla, she's the managing director of the Credit Guarantee Company of the Republic of Egypt. She is also the chairwoman of the Euro-Mediterranean Guarantee Network. And this is also a regional institution that we have developed together with other partners to really develop a thinking about more use of guarantees, co-guarantees at a national and regional level. So Nagla, the floor is yours. What is the role of guarantees according to you?
Thank you, Reem. Thanks for the invitation, and after congratulations, of course, of the COP27, and thanking you for this invitation at the Mediterranean Pavilion. Let me jump immediately from what we've heard, actually, from our participants here in these sessions and the excellence with the early point. The very important point, there was a clear emphasis on it is time to move to adaptation and to implementation. And this actually move, by definition, reflects a very important fundamental role of governments, you know, to ease this move to implementation and to enable the utilization of a strong tool to enable de-risking the private capital and mobilizing the green investment. And this tool actually that I'm talking about now is the risk mitigation. It had been, actually, this is a word that had been mentioned across and in number of timing of other sessions about risk mitigation, you know, to enable the flow of funding to the climate change and the green finance. And this is where the guarantee schemes step in. The very important point when we talk about the guarantee, this is an industry of approximately $2 trillion by end of 2021. So it's an existing industry that proved its role in overcoming bottlenecks and the critical timing as well as in peace timing. And this is where we are when it comes to green finance, when it comes to climate change, with yet to be developed the proper information about this cluster, about measuring its risk. So this is the role of the guarantee. And here, actually, what we're talking about also, it is the tool that proved to be the most favorable tool for policymakers for a number of reasons. Where number one, it maximizes the utilization of government resources by applying widely known guarantee leverage mechanism. So against a $1, you can go up to $50, you know, for facilitating this access to finance. It's also postponing the government liabilities because the default will occur later. So which will give the government some time to define, to establish their own measurements, and we all establish our information base. And of course, it provides cheaper finance as per Basel II that give way to the guarantee certificates, you know, enabling whoever is financing to come with a cheaper finance. Having said that, you know, and another important point, the ability of guarantee schemes to develop comprehensive information through their involvement with different financial institutions that will be the base for all of us to come with our risk measures, you know, and building our risk base and building our expected or probability of default that will enable us to properly pricing its finance and enable this green financing and the climate change finance. Having said so, as guarantee schemes, we did not stop at that. As Reem mentioned, you know, I'm heading a network, and there are a number of other networks, and the number of international financial institutions across the world, you know, are very much interested in this tool. And I have to also highlight an important thing, that this tool is mainly concerned about the SMEs that are the basic or the highest percentage of the private sector that we all talked about. So the importance is coming from all these factors. So we did not stop at that, and I'm really very pleased to come here and to use this platform to announce on behalf of Guarantee Schemes Task Force of 12 global schemes. We all gathered under the umbrella of the World Bank Secretariat and our colleague Pietro Calicia, and we worked for 8 months to conclude a very important assignment, and we came by end of September by what we call it, guidelines for integrating climate change mitigation and the adaptation into guarantee schemes for SMEs. It was very important to prepare ourselves as guarantee schemes to carry this role, that we know that all governments will be coming to us with this role. So we have to be prepared for this. We did that, we finalized it, according to my colleague Pietro, actually, that this should be announced or published with the World Bank side soon, or it is already published. The very important thing about these guidelines is that we talk here about diversification of the funding structure. We're talking about integrating climate-related and environmental financial risk into our strategy. So what we are doing now at guarantee schemes, we are building our green strategy, incorporating these factors and actually incorporating the eligibility and the qualification criteria of the SMEs and the partner bank. We're talking about operational tools. We're talking about evaluation system. And the most important thing, the disclosure of our climate-related information and matrices related to our activities to the whole public. We are ready with our guidelines. If not all of us, but quite a percentage of us have already started working on their strategies to be ready for what's expected from our governments to carry this role and take it ahead and go ahead with enabling this finance, as we said, maximizing the government resources and actually building our information to be able to build a reliable risk base to judge and to price whatever is coming into green finance. So I'm very happy to announce that, and I'm very pleased, with the COP27 to take it as a stage from which we are announcing this new guidelines, that we did it, we work it on, and we are not currently implementing it. Thank you very much, Uli.
Very much, Nagila, for this, and I think we will continue working on this work together within the EMGN umbrella, also to ensure that this is implemented in practice for the real economy, and I think this will accelerate the transition toward a green economy, circular economy, and then sustainability in general, because at the end, this is what we want to achieve. And as we heard today, all stakeholders will have to be collaborating, having this mechanism of private-public partnership to accelerate the transition toward real actions. I would like to give the floor to Kwame Saprong Barnier. Kwame, he's a partner of KPMG, Ghana. Kwame has been very active on the ESG risk disclosure. I think the role of audit, the role of accounting, the role of compliance, the role of risk is essential in this transition. So please, Kwame, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Rim. Thank you for the opportunity to be on this panel. I mean, I love Nagila's passion with regards to how she was talking about the disclosures, and it's super important. The whole ESG and sustainable financing is enhancing and growing so fast, but then the disclosure issues are clear. I mean, why do we need it? I mean, I think it's straightforward, right? It demonstrates accountability and transparency. It gives the right information with regards to what you're doing. Investors are asking for it. 7 out of 10 investors today are asking portfolios to be diversified with green bonds and other ESG-related matters. Most regulators are significantly moving towards that. I mean, it's a clear differentiator. So in terms of disclosure, this is why it's important. Now, so some of the things that make disclosures work well or come up to life is involvement of the senior most people in the entities. Directors, the board of directors, the CEOs must sit down to understand what it is that they want to disclose. They have to understand materialities. So what is important and how is that information going to support that need to be transparent and to be held accountable? Again, it's important to note that this is not just a public relation brochure or anything that's just given. It is actually non-financial KPI that's supposed to complement your financial information that we are already used to issuing. Now, let me just give some examples just to now. I mean, I've put them in a few segments. I mean, but one is workplace quality, environmental protection, operating practices, and community involvement. Again, this is not exhaustive. But when you look at workplace quality, I mean, things such as working conditions can be easily put out if it's well-defined, clear KPIs and reported. Health and safety standards, development and training calendar and agendas that we use to enhance our relationship. When you come to the environmental protection, emissions, very, very important. How we use resources, how we impact the environment from a natural resource perspective. If you come to operating practices, how does your supply chain look like? How responsible are you in bringing on partners? I mean, your vendors, all the partners that you, how do you ensure that they have responsible practices? Now we move to the community involvement, very straightforward. Community investment, what sort of investments are we making into the community? What livelihood supports are we bringing in there? And then this is just kind of a gist of things that could be reported and are important to be reported. But then the reality is that this is evolving so fast. I mean, last year, about November last year, IFRS Foundation put up, created a new standard, right, called International Sustainable Standard Board. And their primary objective is to consolidate and bring proper reporting on these non-financial matters in ways that we've learned in bringing financial information to our stakeholders. We all know Global Reporting Initiative, GRI, very, very, very significant in issuing some of these standards. Now, the challenge is that there are multiple frameworks that are evolving very fast. So sometimes it becomes difficult for companies to even understand which sort of framework. But I think the good thing is that there's consolidation. If you look at what I just mentioned about the IFRS 9 Foundation, there seems to be consolidation around what should be reported, what should be measured, and this is helping. There's also a challenge, I mean, with regards to people getting used to it. So I like the point that Mirab made about continuous engagement and training to bring people up to speed. Data has now become the new oil. Data on ESG is difficult to find unless you are intentional to shape it up at the beginning, linking it to your key objectives and making sure that you capture it and it can be relied upon. Because once you start reporting things that are incorrect, that sense of trust goes down, right? Now, in all this, the benefit of having disclosures cannot be overstated because these disclosures must come out to show how impactful you are as an entity to where your stakeholders, and to be able to do that clearly through non-financial information is something that is super important. So thank you all, and thank you, Rim, for the opportunity.
Thank you, Kwame, for emphasizing the role of disclosure. I think this is the way forward, in fact, to know what is being considered as ESG compliant or not. And also, the quality of data is also important. And this is why training and trying really to collect the right information, not too much information, but the right information is essential. And this is also gives a role to institutions like yourself to really push toward this, what I still call the transformative scenario. So it's not really one stakeholder, one group of stakeholders involved in this, but many, and all working together toward the same objective. So I would like to introduce Enrique de Velamore. He's a director of MedWaves, Regional Center for Sustainable Consumption and Production. Is a center under the UNEP Mediterranean Action Plan, has been very active in really pushing for new business models that are sustainable in the Mediterranean. So you heard all of these finance speeches, transparency, ESG, access to finance. Of course, everybody is committed into this new model for sustainability. So what is your view about it, and how do you see the Mediterranean, especially from an entrepreneurship point of view, benefiting from these new changes that are being developed in the next years and already started probably? Enrique.
Thank you very much, Rim, for having invited me to this event. And I will try to give just an opinion on your reflection. Basically, of course, I'm optimistic on the changes that are to come with regard to favoring, let's say, sustainability by the different actors having a say in all the financial system. However, I must say that so far, and according to our experience, there is still a big lack to address as far as the support to entrepreneurship and innovation is concerned in our region, in the Mediterranean. Well, basically, I will mention something that probably will be evident for everybody, but sometimes we forget, which is that curiosity, creativity, innovation, risk have been namely entrepreneurship, have been the drivers of both our human history and even our human prehistory. I mean, from the guy or the girl who discovered the fire, the one who invented the wheel, when we have another one who invented at some moment the printing press, and recently another guy who just discovered or invented or transformed space rockets in space elevators. So we are talking about Elon Musk. These people have been, not these people, but entrepreneurs in general have been main drivers or let's say catalyzers in let's say the evolution and development of our societies throughout all our history. However, our education systems in most countries are still anchored in a very old-fashioned approach that is focused more on, let's say, creating employees than not creators or entrepreneurs. So, in that sense, I think that there are two main, let's say, main challenges for the financial sector, or the financial colleagues, or these institutions that basically are deciding how the world is to be developed. And in that sense, I would say that first of all is that we are still having a financial system that is not favoring entrepreneurs. And when I mean entrepreneurs, of course, I'm referring especially to those people that have great ideas, but they lack the financial leadership support, because of course you can have entrepreneurs that are, let's say, favored with let's say good economic conditions, and they can have their own risk and they put their own money in a project, and if they fail, they can continue doing another stuff. But most entrepreneurs are lacking that needed financial support. In our experience, we have been receiving from the countries of the southern region in the last only the last 6 years, more than 6,000 applications of green entrepreneurs for circular economy, providing great ideas but lacking with the needed financial resources. And we have had to deal with a lot of difficulties in order to both, let's say, provide them with the needed training skills, and even more difficulties to try to channel finance for them to start their business. And in that issue, we just rely on the support from the colleagues, basically channeling the money, the finance. And last but not the least, and this probably it's even a tougher challenge is that the fact that also probably it's evident that that neither the environmental, let's say, added value or the social added value provided by specific entrepreneurs, by those entrepreneurs that are trying to create a product or service that is not only providing an economic value for them, but also an environmental and social value for society, they are not really integrated in the decision-making processes of those ones channeling the funding. So if this is not changing, it will be very difficult that support to entrepreneurship and to innovation will be really being focused for the sake of addressing climate change, addressing marine litter, addressing all the different environmental challenges, global challenges that we know that humankind is facing. So that would be my answer to your question. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Enrique. I think you made a very important point on there is more to be done to finance sustainable entrepreneurs. And this comes, of course, from the financial sector and also from the guarantee systems and other providers of finance, like, for example, venture capital, private equity firms, to ensure that sustainable entrepreneurship is not only about, I would call it, respecting the environment and trying really to develop new business models that are sustainable based on, for example, sustainable patterns of production or business models. But also, we heard yesterday that they need to continue to be viable in terms of value creation. So then they attract investors, they attract financial providers to move forward with it. So I was told that Nagla would like to add something. Please, Nagla. Yeah, Nagla, please, we hear you.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Now, yes.
Yeah. Yes.
Yes, Nagla, yes, please go ahead.
Yeah. Sorry?
Yes, we hear you, Nagla, please.
Oh no, actually, I was just, I don't know. I thought that you wanted to ask me something. I think actually, like I lowered the hand. Okay. Yes, no, I lowered the hand.
But okay, I wanted to just say to you that there is a clear role for guarantees to support sustainable entrepreneurs. Of course, all the initiatives that you have been doing with the World Bank should really, at the end, be implemented toward what I call further access to finance, to sustainable entrepreneurship, new business models that are aligned to whatever we call the decarbonization scenario in terms of mitigation and adaptation. So I think in that perspective, again, in the Mediterranean countries, the role of guarantees, local and international guarantees, is very, very important. And beyond that, of course, you have other financial providers. We heard the role of the European Investment Bank this morning, and they have been extremely active as well to finance sustainable entrepreneurship in the Mediterranean and beyond. So with this, since I see that our time is off, we are already 10 minutes late, I would like to thank all the panelists that have joined us today from wherever they are. Thank you very much, Emmanuel. Thank you for your contribution, and we will continue working together on how we can enhance access to finance, a new financing mechanism for stability and sustainability in Africa. Robert, I think the debt transparency has started, and I think we need to continue moving forward into enhancing disclosure, transparency on the lending side of governments, of large companies, and of public sector players. Also, Nagla, we are working together to develop guarantees, co-guarantees at the regional level. Kwame on disclosure and audits. I think the role of audit firms and risk assessment and compliance is also essential. Enrique. I think we will continue working together. We have another event at the Spanish Pavilion on the same topic today at 5-6. So whoever wants to join us, please, at the Spanish Pavilion. But then this event will be only physical, in person, not hybrid. So thank you very much for everybody who joined us online. And we see you soon in our events in EMEA. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Reem. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Reem.
Bye.
Everyone. Bye.